In this episode, we take on a problem that shows up in almost every environment, even ones that believe they are well-run. Change happens constantly, and every change is a chance for security to improve or quietly fall apart. Beginners often think security drift means someone made a bad decision on purpose, but drift is usually more boring than that. It is the slow accumulation of small, reasonable changes that were each justified at the time, but that together create a system that no longer matches the intended security posture. A server gets a quick exception to fix an outage, a new feature ships with a default setting that never gets revisited, an old account stays active because the offboarding task was missed, and suddenly you have a new normal that nobody planned. SecurityX cares about change and configuration management because they are the mechanisms that keep a program stable over time. If you can't manage change, your standards and policies become wishes because the environment evolves out from under them. We are going to define change management and configuration management in plain language, explain how drift happens, and build practical mental models for controlling change without making the organization feel like it is moving through wet cement. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Change management is the set of practices that decide how changes are requested, reviewed, approved, scheduled, communicated, and evaluated after they happen. The key word is managed, because change is not the enemy. Unmanaged change is the enemy. In a healthy program, changes are not blocked. They are guided so that risk is understood and unintended consequences are reduced. Beginners sometimes picture change management as a committee that says no, but the better picture is a traffic system that prevents collisions. Some changes are low risk and can move quickly, like updating documentation or making a small adjustment that is reversible. Some changes are high risk and need more scrutiny, like altering authentication settings, changing network paths, or modifying access privileges. The exam often tests whether you recognize that not all changes should be treated the same, because a one-size-fits-all process creates either chaos or paralysis. If the process is too light, risky changes slip through. If the process is too heavy, teams work around it, which is worse because you lose visibility and accountability. So the goal is proportional control, where the process matches the risk and the potential impact. Configuration management is related but different, and it answers a separate question. What is the current state of our systems, and what state are they supposed to be in? Change management is about how you decide and execute changes. Configuration management is about defining, tracking, and maintaining the baseline configuration of systems and services. A baseline is essentially a known good starting point, like a standard set of secure settings, approved versions, and required components. Without a baseline, you can't tell whether a system is drifting because you don't have a reference point. This is why configuration management is foundational for security. If you can't reliably answer questions like which systems exist, what versions they run, what settings are enabled, and who owns them, then your ability to secure them is limited. On SecurityX, configuration management is not about memorizing a specific tool, but about understanding that security depends on knowing and controlling system state. When a scenario describes unknown configurations, inconsistent settings, or surprise behaviors after updates, configuration management is usually involved. Security drift is what happens when your actual environment slowly diverges from your intended environment, and it can happen even when everyone is trying to do the right thing. Drift often starts with exceptions. An exception might be granted because a legacy application can't support a security setting or because a business deadline is tight. Exceptions can be reasonable, but they become dangerous when they are not tracked, reviewed, and retired. Another drift source is inconsistent processes, where one team follows standards and another team improvises, resulting in a patchwork environment. Drift also comes from silent changes, like auto updates, default settings that change after a version upgrade, or cloud services that introduce new features with new permissions. And drift can come from human turnover, where the person who understood why something was configured a certain way leaves, and the configuration becomes tribal knowledge that decays. The exam tests drift because it is a program maturity issue. Mature programs assume drift will happen and build controls to detect it early, rather than pretending the environment will stay stable on its own. A useful mental model for controlling change without creating drift is what I call the three gates model: intent, impact, and verification. Intent means you can clearly state what you are trying to accomplish with the change and why it is needed. Impact means you consider what could break, what security assumptions might change, and which stakeholders will be affected. Verification means you confirm after the change that it worked as intended and did not introduce new risk. Beginners often skip intent and jump straight to action, especially in stressful moments, and that is where drift begins. If you don't define intent, you can't later evaluate whether the change succeeded. If you don't evaluate impact, you create surprises that trigger emergency fixes. If you don't verify, you never notice that a setting reverted or that a control stopped working. This three gates model is also exam-friendly because many SecurityX questions are really asking which step is missing. If a change caused an outage, the missing gate might have been impact analysis. If a change was made and no one knows whether it was effective, the missing gate is verification. If changes feel random and inconsistent, the missing gate is intent and documentation. Another critical concept is the difference between normal change and emergency change, because the process needs to handle both without falling apart. Normal changes are planned, reviewed, scheduled, and communicated. Emergency changes happen when there is a high-impact incident or outage and waiting would cause significant harm. Beginners sometimes assume emergency change means rules do not apply, but a mature program treats emergency change as a different lane on the same road, with special rules. The review may be faster, the approval may be streamlined, and documentation may occur after the fact, but accountability still exists. The danger is allowing emergency mode to become the default mode, because then everything is urgent and nothing is controlled. Security drift thrives in permanent emergency mode, because the focus becomes restoring service quickly and security impacts are treated as tomorrow's problem. SecurityX questions may describe an incident where an emergency fix was applied and then never revisited, creating a lingering vulnerability. The best answer often involves making the emergency change traceable, then following up with a proper review and a planned remediation to bring the system back toward baseline. To keep configuration stable, you need the idea of a configuration baseline and the idea of deviation management. A baseline is what good looks like for a system type, like a secure build standard for workstations or servers. Deviation management is what you do when reality cannot match the baseline for a valid reason. The baseline provides consistency and reduces risk by default. Deviation management provides flexibility without losing control. The key is that deviations should be visible, approved, and time-bound when possible. If deviations are invisible, they become hidden risk. If deviations are permanent without review, they become drift that no one remembers to fix. For the exam, this matters because many scenarios involve exceptions, legacy constraints, or business needs that conflict with security standards. The correct approach is rarely to pretend the constraint does not exist. Instead, the correct approach is to document the deviation, assess the risk, apply compensating controls when needed, and set review conditions. Even as a beginner, you can understand this as making trade-offs explicit rather than accidental. Communication is another component that beginners underestimate, but it is central to change control. A change that is technically correct can still cause harm if stakeholders are surprised. Communication reduces accidental disruption, like when a team pushes a change that breaks another team's dependency. It also reduces security confusion, like when a monitoring team sees new behavior and assumes it is malicious because nobody told them a change was coming. In a mature program, change communication includes what is changing, when it is changing, who is affected, how to respond if something goes wrong, and how to confirm success. This is not about writing long emails. It is about clarity. On SecurityX, a scenario may describe false alarms, outages, or unplanned downtime following a change, and improved communication and scheduling might be part of the best answer. Communication also ties to accountability, because if everyone is informed, it is harder for changes to be made quietly without review. Quiet changes are one of the fastest ways to create drift because they bypass the gates. Let's also address a common misconception that the goal of change management is to prevent change. The real goal is to create safe change. Safe change means you can move quickly where risk is low and carefully where risk is high. This is why classification matters. Changes can be categorized based on risk and complexity so that low-risk changes can be pre-approved or follow a lightweight path, while high-risk changes require deeper review and stronger verification. If you treat every change as high risk, the process becomes unbearable and teams work around it. Workarounds often include making changes outside the process, which removes evidence and increases drift. If you treat every change as low risk, you will eventually have a high-risk change that slips through and causes a serious incident. The exam will often reward answers that balance these realities and emphasize risk-based decision-making. It is the same principle as not overbuilding controls where they are not needed, because security that cannot be lived with will not be lived with. Another drift control is continuous checking, meaning you don't only evaluate security when a change request is filed. Drift can happen without a formal change request, so mature programs also look for signs of divergence from baseline over time. This might include regular reviews of configurations, periodic access reviews, monitoring for unexpected changes, and comparing systems to required standards. The important point for SecurityX is conceptual. Drift is detected by comparing what is to what should be. If you don't define should, you can't detect drift, and if you don't check, you can't correct drift early. Many security incidents have a drift story behind them, like a control that was disabled during troubleshooting and never re-enabled. Continuous checking catches that before it becomes an exploitable gap. On exam questions, if you see repeated issues that reappear after being fixed, it often indicates drift and lack of verification or lack of ongoing monitoring. The best answer usually includes improving the control loop so that fixes stick instead of fading. Change and configuration management also connect to incident response in a way that can surprise beginners. When an incident happens, responders often need to make changes quickly to contain damage, like isolating a system or disabling an account. Those changes should still be tracked, because after the incident you need to understand what was changed, why it was changed, and whether those changes should remain. If you don't track incident-driven changes, you can create accidental drift that persists long after the crisis. For example, a temporary block might be left in place and later break a business process, or a temporary access grant might remain and become a security vulnerability. A mature approach treats incident-driven changes as part of the change record, even if documentation happens after the fact due to urgency. SecurityX often tests this kind of thinking because it shows you understand security as a managed program, not a series of isolated events. The test wants you to see that every emergency action should have a follow-up to restore order, update baselines, and capture lessons learned. As we wrap up, remember that security drift is not primarily a technical failure. It is a program failure where change happens without clear intent, without impact awareness, or without verification and follow-through. Change management guides how decisions are made and executed, while configuration management defines what good looks like and tracks whether reality matches it. Together, they create stability over time, which is what keeps security controls meaningful instead of decorative. The best approach is proportional control, lightweight for low-risk changes, stronger for high-risk changes, and always with clear accountability and traceability. Use the 3 gates model of intent, impact, and verification to keep your thinking organized. And remember that emergency changes are still changes that need to be tracked and reviewed afterward. For SecurityX, these ideas help you answer scenario questions because you can identify where the control loop broke and which program element restores it. If you can keep change safe and configurations aligned to baseline, you don't just reduce risk today, you prevent the slow drift that creates tomorrow's surprise breach.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.